and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Herman Pontzer is an associate professor of evolutionary anthropology at Duke University. He is also an associate research professor of global health at the Duke Global Health Institute. He is an internationally recognized researcher in human energetics and evolution. Over 2 decades of research in the field and laboratory, Dr. Pontzer has conducted groundbreaking studies across a range of settings, including literal fieldwork, like in the field with the Hadza, a group of hunter-gatherers in northern Tanzania. He has also studied chimpanzee ecology in the rainforests of Uganda and metabolic measurements of great apes in zoos and sanctuaries around the globe. He is the author of the best-selling book, Burn. New research blows the lid off how we really burn calories, lose weight, and stay healthy, which was published in March of 2021. Dr. Pontzer's work has been covered in the New York Times, the BBC, PBS, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, NPR, Scientific American, among others. Dr. Herman Pontzer, it's amazing to introduce you to Boundless Body Radio. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Absolutely. It's an honor. We tricked you, actually. We told you that we were going to talk about like your studies, but actually we thought you'd be more interested into considering investing in us. We have this new supplement that we want to talk about, which is called Metaboblast Jimoni Juice Supplements, which is guaranteed to boost your metabolism by 200%. And so we're going to spend the hour kind of talking about how you're going to get into our downline.
I'm so excited. Yeah, if you have any of that dehydrated water or other stuff too, I can get behind. I love all those products. That's wonderful.
We regularly lose potential sponsors on this show, and we just apparently lost ourselves as a potential sponsor. And I'm going to lose the intermittent fasting bar as a potential sponsor. You posted about that on Twitter, which is something I found at the store a few weeks ago and just died laughing. Intermittent fasting food, like.
Yeah, that's like the barefoot running shoes. Yeah,
it's amazing.
You can't go wrong, you know.
It's absolutely amazing. Well, I want to deep dive into your work, but I want to start at the brush fire that you encountered in Tanzania. That
oh my God.
Sounds absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Where to start? I mean, so to set the scene for people, you know, we're lucky enough to be able to do this work. My colleagues and I, Dave Reichland and Brian Wood and I, and a couple others, but Dave and Brian and I are kind of been doing this for a while together. And, you know, we go and we work with this community called the Hadza. And that's a group of people a population of folks in northern Tanzania. So this is like, you know, northern Tanzania, semi-arid savanna, you know, it's kind of typical National Geographic kind of, you know, scenery, you know, acacia trees and tall golden grass, really dry kind of landscape. And it was my first summer there with the Hadza. We were doing metabolic work, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, but doing field work there. And, you know, it was my first summer, and I've done a lot of camping and stuff, but I haven't done anything where, you know, you might get eaten by a fire, surprised by a fire. And so these scientific, you know, fieldwork expeditions, I guess you can call them. They're basically big camping trips. You know, you load up your Land Rover with all your computers and everything, as well as like your tent and your food and all your stuff to camp for a couple months when you live in these, these remote locations. And Dave and I were there, and Brian had gone off to like hunt for a giraffe with the guys because the men hunt and they also get honey. The women gather plant foods. That's how the Hadza kind of make a living out there as hunter gatherers. And so Brian was off looking for a giraffe with a couple of the guys that had been shot. The giraffe had been shot a couple of days before. And Dave and I were at camp, just, you know, getting our scientific kind of equipment together and ready to run a couple of experiments the next day. And we started to hear this kind of crackle and smell the smoke on the wind. And we couldn't believe it. You know, At first you just think it's a campfire, like somebody's campfire, just kind of like the breeze just wafted it your way. And then you realize, oh my God, like, no, we're there's like a fire, like we're actually in the middle of a fire. And you know, that grass just lights up like crazy. So it's like there's a 6-foot wall of flames kind of just steadily marching toward us.
Oh my God.
You know, and you've got like extra jerry cans of diesel fuel. You've got all your scientific stuff. You've got all your, you know, samples. And, your tents are made out of thin nylon, which would just, melt or burn. And, and you're time limited, right? You got like 5 minutes to figure out, 1 second, you're like literally fiddling with your respirometry equipment, this little briefcase sized, oxygen analyzer. And the next minute you're like, holy shit, we're going to die.
Wow.
I don't think we ever really thought we would die. But I didn't think we would die. But what I thought would happen is everything would be trashed. We would burn up the Land Rovers. We would burn up the tents. We would burn up everything. And it would just be done. Like,
oh my God,
all the effort to get out there, all the work gone. And maybe we would get hurt, but mostly I was just thinking, oh my God, everything's going to be trashed. And so we had no idea what to do. And we got the bright idea. So as these grass fires march forward, there's like this line of fire that's about, that's kind of a wall marching for you. But behind the wall where it's already burned, that's like the one place that can't burn anymore, right? On the whole landscape, the only place that won't burn is where it's already burned.
Yeah, right.
So then the trick is you just have to go through the wall of fire to get there.
Evil
and
Knievel
so that's
style.
what we did. We threw everything in the Land Rovers and aimed for kind of a gap in the wall of flame and just punched it. And yeah, we made it through. Obviously, we're here talking about it, but that was like that was really felt like a super close call at the time. Even in retrospect, feels like a kind of a close call.
That's crazy. Did you ever consider a stunt career after that? Like that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, thanks, man. I don't know. It's funny. I for fun, I really enjoy rock climbing and mountaineering and that kind of stuff. So I used to work on an ambulance. And so as an EMT back in my Penn State days. And so I've always really enjoed the kind of time pressure, figure this out right now kind of thing. It's always really been really fun for me. And with high stakes, figure out how you're going to get through this rock climbing move or figure out what you're going to do with this patient who's not breathing. And of course, there's the real stress of it and you really don't, it's not a game obviously, but the stress of that and the figure it out right now kind of thing, I guess I like that. Just based on my own behavior. If I were to look at my own life, I guess I enjoy that kind of thing. So
wow,
maybe it was a good moment for me.
Well, that makes one of us. That's super impressive. Yeah. You mentioned in your book several times a phrase that they use when tragic things happen, and that fire ended up doubling back and wiping out a few of the houses.
That's right.
And they have a phrase that's almost like Hakuna Matata, like no worries, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't care. It means that they're highly adaptable. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So that's exactly right. So that fire later on. So first of all, I should say the Hadza came over because a lot of women were still in camp and they helped us they cut boughs out of the trees and they're beating the fire down so it doesn't get their houses. And they're singing songs and they're laughing about it. And so, immediately you're like, oh wait, why am I, I had my shoulders up and the hair on the back of my neck was up and I was all stressed and macho about the whole thing. And these women come over and they're like, la-di-da, singing songs, beating the fire back. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's actually a way more chill way to deal with this than how we were doing it.
That's amazing.
But then nonetheless, like you say, the fire later on that day kind of doubled back and ended up kind of sneaking up behind the camp and it torched a couple of their houses. They live in grass houses and it torched a couple of their houses. And I thought, oh my God, I felt so bad for them. And I walked over if I can. So we set up our tents and stuff a little bit outside of their camp because we don't want to be in their business more than we need to be. So I walked from the research camp over to them and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry about this." And the women were like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "About your house." Oh, whatever. Hamna Shida. And that's the expression isn't Hakuna Matata. It's Hamna Shida. Although actually in Swahili, it means the same thing. Shida and Matata are the same. They both mean problems. And Hakuna is a different way of saying no. So the Hakuna Matata thing gets on everybody who works in Africa's nerves because it becomes it becomes an earworm, and it's like you see it on T-shirts and stuff like that. So and it kind of it sort of also trivializes it a little bit, I guess. But it is true that folks there, they absolutely they live in a pretty high stakes world. They don't have medicine, they don't have easy access to things that will solve your problems for you. And they aren't sort of comforted by, think about all the layers of protection we have in our lives here in the industrialized world from, the protections on our food, to the medicines that we have at the store, to the ways that we have these sort of permanent shelters that are always feel pretty safe. And, when those break down, it's a really big deal for us. But those protections aren't even there for them, and so it isn't that they don't get it. They totally have this, they understand concern and worry, but they're just, they have a very kind of, well, it's going to be okay. Hamnashita, we're going to get through this and just kind of be flexible and adaptive. And that's how they live their lives.
Wow. I love that. I think all of us could use a little bit more of that in our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. That's so cool. So how did you become interested in metabolism and evolution?
Yeah. So I'm an anthropologist by training, particularly interested in human evolution. And so it's really natural for somebody who's interested in evolution to be interested in energetics. And that's because, from a purely kind of, evolutionary perspective, life is a game of turning energy into babies, right? That's where the rubber hits the road in evolution. However good an organism is at taking energy from its environment and converting that into offspring, that's its measure of success, right? And individuals that are more successful at that than others are going to have more offspring, pass on their traits, pass on their genes, and evolution carries on. So any species you see, if you can understand how it spends its calories, you understand a whole lot about just how it evolved and how it kind of adapts to its environment. And so it's real natural, I think, for people in evolution to be interested in energy and in calories. Not a lot of us sort of go out and explicitly measure it. Often we kind of get at this in indirect ways, but I wanted to measure it, to actually measure calorie expenditure and really be able to kind of do I guess you can think about it sort of like the forensic accounting of the human body. Where do the calories go? How do we get the calories in? Where do they go? And the other piece of the puzzle here is that we have measurements. We've had lots of measurements of energy expenditure for over a century now in Western contexts, right? In industrialized contexts, but we didn't have a whole lot of those data. In fact, we had no measurements of hunter-gatherer data, hunter-gatherer populations before I did this work with Brian and Dave. And that's really important because, humans, we're a hunting and gathering species from a hunting and gathering genus, right? We're Homo sapiens, and the genus Homo is a hunting and gathering genus, been doing it for 2.5 million years. And so that's the lifestyle, that's the ecology that shaped our body and our physiology. And so if you want to understand how our bodies sort of, what normal is for humans, well, normal is not what you and I are doing here in the industrialized world. Not that it's good or bad, but it's not normal, right? Normal is hunting and gathering. And so to find populations that are still doing it, I mean, they're just as modern as you and me genetically and all that kind of thing. They're modern folks too, but they have this lifestyle that holds on to these old traditions. It allows us to ask what hunting and gathering does to your body.
And so you went over there to measure their metabolism, which I was fortunate enough to do that for many years of my career, which is really fun. You get to understand kind of how people are burning calories. And so obviously, you and I are sitting around right now. We're not really doing anything. We're not burning a lot of calories. So these people that are hunting and gathering, clearly they would be burning more calories than we would, correct?
Yeah. Well, that's what we expected. Absolutely. So we wrote these grants to the National Science Foundation and said, look, we need to get data on hunter-gatherers. Hasn't been done before. We know they're really physically active. And so we know they're going to be burning lots more calories than people in the West, but we don't know how much that difference is. We don't know how many more calories they're spending every day than we are. So we need to go measure it and figure out what that difference is. And by the way, we want to do it using this state-of-the-art, gold standard method. We don't want to go over there and estimate these things because estimations will have errors associated. We want to go over and really measure it as precisely as we can with this isotope tracking method. And so we got the money to do that and headed over to measure energy expenditures in men and women over there in the Hadza community.
Can you explain the difference between those two measurement methods? Because I was unaware of this. This is super fascinating to me. I was using indirect telemetry for most of my career, measuring respiration to understand metabolism, but you used a different method, which is, again, just super fascinating to me.
Yeah. So it would all fall under the umbrella of indirect calorimetry because you're not measuring heat. So when your body burns calories, it's the same as when fire burns wood, right? You are oxidizing a fuel, and just like a wood fire, your body when you burn calories, you give off heat. That's why your body's warm. And, somebody who's dead is cold. Anyway, so, when you're burning energy, you're oxidizing fuel, you're giving off heat. And so you can measure that heat directly. And so that's direct calorimetry. So the calor in calorimetry is the same as like the word calor for heat in Spanish, right? And so, so if you measure heat directly, then it's direct calorimetry. But what everybody else does or should do is measure indirect calorimetry, which is you measure the oxygen that goes into the fire, and you can measure the carbon dioxide that comes out, right? So just like in the same way again as a wood fire, it consumes oxygen, and your body gives off carbon dioxide. And so if you're measuring those like you did with your metabolic cart, you put a mask on somebody or you put them under a hood, and either way you're capturing their expired breath and using the oxygen and CO2 content of that to measure how much oxygen they consume and how much CO2 they produce. So that's like a breath or a respirometry based approach, which is really common. And if some people might have even had that done to them at a doctor's office, more doctor's offices are doing it these days. But obviously that doesn't work for like all day, every day, right? Because how could we put that mask on you for 24 hours or even a week?
Yeah, exactly.
So what we do instead is this is a technique called doubly labeled water. It's an isotope-based technique. And you drink some water where some of the hydrogens are a different isotope called deuterium, different form of the atom. Some of the oxygens are a different form of oxygen called oxygen 18. And it's totally safe. We use this in industrialized populations in the US and stuff all the time. It's a completely safe method. But basically that allows us to track hydrogens flowing through your body and oxygens flowing through your body, because we can use those different isotopes as kind of a tracer. And so you drink some of this water, and if we get, then if we measure like a urine sample or a saliva sample, we'd see that you get enriched in those isotopes. Those tracers go up, right? You have more of them in your body than you normally would. And then over time, you lose the hydrogens in the water that you pee out or sweat out or breathe out when you breathe out water vapor. So the hydrogens go with the H, right? The H's are hydrogens, H2Os that you lose in your water. The O's that you drank, you lose those as H2O as well, but you also lose them as CO2. So the carbon dioxide that you breathe out is also a way that you're losing those oxygens. And so by comparing how quickly your body loses the hydrogens to how quickly your body loses the oxygens, we can actually calculate very precisely how much carbon dioxide your body makes. And you can't burn calories without making carbon dioxide. You can't make carbon dioxide without burning calories. And so it becomes this really precise way of measuring calories for people who all we need, we don't need to mess up their lives at all or get them in a lab. All we need is for them to drink a little bit of water and to get a couple of urine samples over the course of a week or so. And we get a really good measurement of calories per day over that week.
Wow. Is that an inexpensive thing to do?
No. A lab like mine, so we specialize in this now. There's a handful of labs in the world, actually, that kind of specialize in doing this isotope technique. The water is expensive. That's the main thing. And so to get isotopically enriched water, and then, we do have to analyze it. So there's wear and tear on the machine, all that stuff. We can do it it depends on the price of water, which kind of goes up and down like the price of oil. But in the ballpark of like $600 or $800 a person, something like that.
Wow.
It also depends on the size of the person, right? For little kids, they use less. The size of the dose that they drink is proportional to the size of the person. And so like a child doesn't drink as much, so you can do children for a little bit cheaper. But yeah, it's not cheap. There's a lot of medical tests we can do that. You do it for like $5 or $10 for the test. You might get charged more by the doctor, but the actual test itself doesn't cost that much. But these things are a bit more expensive.
Gotcha. Okay. So when you look at, standard Western culture, you see what people are doing. They're clearly, sitting around too much. They're not exercising. They're not moving around. They're eating way too many calories. Clearly their metabolic rates are going to be way lower than people who are going out every single day and finding their food, right? Like, so how many thousands and thousands of calories more are those people burning than we are here in a Western culture?
Yeah, so that is a great question to ask. And the huge shocker was that there's no difference at all, right? That was like the mind-blowing discovery with the Hadza work. We got these data back. We got the isotope, we got all these urine samples back. had them analyzed. At that time, I wasn't running my samples myself. So we sent them to one of the best labs in the world, Bill Wong at Baylor. And he analyzed all the samples. He's been doing this for 30 years. He's a leading guy in this technique, and gave us our data back. And they were no different. So women were burning like 1,800 calories a day. Men were burning about 2,500 calories a day. That sex difference is just due to differences in body size. Men are a little bit bigger, like they are in any population. So total shocker, man, complete shocker. We were really knocked over because, like you say, the Hadza are getting 5 times more physical activity every day than you and I do, or anyway, the typical Americans do. And we were sure they would have these high expenditures, and they don't. So a really physically active population burns the same number of calories every day as a very sedentary population.
Wow. That is, that's mind blowing. You wouldn't even consider that. I mean, I saw it all the time with people that tried to do diets or extreme exercise programs where, yes, you can burn a lot of calories on a treadmill, and the treadmill will tell you that you burned, 500 calories and you're going to leave a big sweaty mess. And over time, I know what's going to happen in the course of a month or 2 months or 3 months. You are going to be very cold. You're going to be very moody. You're going to be hungry. You're going to be craving carbohydrates. And chances are you don't have the energy to keep up that program that you started on. And then you're going to gain a bunch of weight.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen it from that end more than I have. So doing the fieldwork stuff, we're not treating a lot of obese Hadza. They don't exist. But you're right. So what happens is, as you get, so if somebody starts an exercise program tomorrow, yes, tomorrow you'll burn more calories than you did today. And if you keep it up, then for a while, your body will burn more calories than you did before you started your exercise program. And if the treadmill says you're burning 500 calories a day on the treadmill, then yes, you can kind of add that to whatever you were burning before. And for a while, for a few weeks, that'll be an accurate measure of how many calories you burn every day. But here's the but. Your body will eventually adjust over the course of a month or so. I should say 2 or 3 months, probably. Your body will adjust and it'll get used. It'll begin to anticipate that high level of physical activity, and it'll reduce energy spent on other stuff, whether that's like, you'll change your behavior a bit and be less active outside of your exercise periods. Or what's really exciting is it seems like your physiology actually changes. So inflammation gets turned down, stress reactivity gets suppressed, and you save calories kind of physiologically. So that's a really exciting direction that this research has gone. And all of these changes basically make room for that new exercise program that you started. And so by the end of 6 months, by the end of a year, your total expenditure every day is actually probably quite close to what it was before you even started the exercise program. And your body has basically just made room for most of that exercise.
By taking away from other areas.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
You give such a wonderful analogy in your book about the business. Can you talk about a business analogy of how that works practically?
Yeah. So the business analogy of your body's metabolism is kind of in contrast to the engine analogy. So the engine metaphor that we always use is your body's an engine. You can step on the gas and rev it up and burn more calories. That's not quite right. So the way to think about your metabolism, or the way your body works in general, is it's like a big business, like a really big business, like Amazon or General Motors, or one of these kind of huge businesses that has, one overarching goal, right? So the overarching goal of your body, like any organism's body, is to reproduce, right? That's what evolution has tuned all of your systems to do. Whether you reproduce or not, that's a different question, but that's what your physiology is designed to do, is evolved to do. But like General Motors or Amazon or anything else, there's lots of different parts of that business. So you have an immune system, and a nervous system, and a stress reaction system, and a nutrient delivery system, right? You have 37 trillion cells. They've all got different jobs in different departments within this huge business that is you. And, they might work in energy supply, right? They're not working in reproduction, but they're working in energy supply, and that's their job. Okay, so now how do you manage these many different parts of the business? Well, the manager is your brain. It seems to be mostly centered in the hypothalamus, which is this kind of central management part of your brain that you don't have access to. It's not part of your conscious brain, but it is taking signals from all these different parts of the business, and it's managing intake. It's managing income and expenditures, and in your body, that's energy. It's measuring energy coming in and energy going out. And when times are lean, right, when income is down, or when the physical activity part of your business goes way up and has lots of costs, well, your manager is going to do what any manager would do, and it's going to make decisions about, okay, well, we're going to cut down over here, and we're going to reduce over there. We're going to make the budget balance. So that's the way to think about it, right? Is this sort of dynamic, multi-system thing, business, all organized by the hypothalamus, and lots of levers to pull and adjust to always balance that energy budget.
That's so interesting. I don't think this is boding well for our Metaboblast Jamoni juice supplement. I think we maybe missed the mark on that one. I think we're going to lose some money.
I think you should invest in the dehydrated water.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Better option.
Good idea. Good business advice. That's so interesting. And so, you mentioned the Biggest Loser, which I think is super fascinating. I've been fortunate enough to measure the metabolism, again, using indirect telemetry for this person, measuring respiration after they did, however long they spent on the show, and their metabolism was vastly different, so much lower in a rested state than it was before. And so I think this plays into the concept that you call constrained energy expenditure. Is that correct?
Yeah. So that's there's different parts of it, but that's right. So basically, what you were showing was that when the body is starved of calories, right? How does the business respond? The business responds by reducing expenditures everywhere it can. And you measure that when you measure your resting metabolic rates that have gone down. On the other side of that, if you have one department of your business that starts increasing its expenditures, like your physical activity, like your muscles are burning lots of calories, then your body adjusts to that as well, right? So, and to keep expenditures for the whole business in a narrow band. In other words, to keep your total energy expenditure, the total calories you burn every day, within a really narrow range. And so that's right. This is all part of this dynamic, responsive metabolism that we don't really control the way we think we do, right? In the race car model of how your metabolism works, right? You step on the gas, you rev the engine, you're in control, you're in the driver's seat. The business model of your metabolism says, no. You are basically watching this business at work, and you're not the manager, because that's your hypothalamus, and you can't control your hypothalamus. And it is making decisions about how to spend calories that are responsive to your lifestyle, but not in the ways that we are typically taught.
How did that change the way you think about exercise? I mean, I guess define what you would consider exercise and how you think about that a little bit differently than you did before.
Yeah. So, I think, first of all, exercise doesn't have to be, an hour at the gym. Exercise can be any physical activity. I think we can kind of broaden our understanding of what that means. Getting your muscles going, getting your heart rate up, any of that can be considered exercise. And before this, before we did this work with the Hadza and kind of went down this road, we've been following these results up for 10 years now. So it's not just the Hadza work anymore, but, before we kind of went down started this direction, I think about exercise like everybody does, that it just kind of adds on, the calories you burn on the treadmill just kind of get added on to whatever else you're doing that day. And that, one of the benefits of exercise is that you increase your daily metabolism, and that's how you keep thin, and that's how that's why exercise is so good for you. I think about it very differently now. Now, the way I understand exercise as being so good for us, and by the way, it absolutely is really, really good for you. I want to be clear about that. We're not saying exercise isn't really good for you. It's absolutely essential and really good for you. But the reason it's so good for you, I think, isn't that it changes how many calories you spend. It's because it changes how you spend them, right? So instead of increasing the total calories you burn every day, the real benefit of exercise is that it's taking energy away from some of the bad stuff that you shouldn't be doing anyway, like inflammation, like high stress reactivity, and that kind of rejuggling, that reprioritization of how you spend your calories, that exercise forces your body to do, is actually one of the really big benefits for why exercise is so darn good for you.
Interesting. So the Hadza, like, what do they do? Are they lifting weights? Are they, running on a treadmill? Like, what types of things that we would look at and call exercise? Like, what are they doing?
They walk a lot. So men get about 19,000 steps a day. Wow. That's on average. So often it's a lot more, but sometimes it's less. Women get like 13,000 steps a day, with a kid on your back.
Wow.
And then when they get wherever they're going, women will spend an hour sometimes a day digging up tubers. So you get a stout stick, about, 3 feet long, nice heavy stick, and sharpen the end, and you dig into this rocky ground and cut out, the root vegetables from these root plants that they eat. So they eat tubers. It's a big part of their diet. Men, if they get lucky and they shoot a big game, they got to carry that home. That's heavy. They usually get their friends to help them out, but or they're climbing up into trees and chopping into these big tree limbs to get honey out, because they often get honey from these wild beehives. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of physical activity. Most of it's walking. Some of it's things like chopping or digging. None of it, in their culture anyway, none of it is like super heavy weightlifting or anything like that. It's a lot of endurance stuff, a lot of cardio, and intermixed with just a little bit of anaerobic. But I don't want to say that that's the only way to do it, right? I mean, that's just one way. That's how they live their lives and get their exercise. I think resistance training could be good for people too, but they don't get a whole lot of that, though. They get mostly cardio.
That's so interesting. You mentioned honey, and the story that you told about the birds cooperating with humans, I thought was absolutely fascinating. Can we take like a quick sidetrack and can you tell that story? That is so cool.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it is amazing. So I was out with this husband and wife, Mossad and Halima, and their little kid. And he was about 1.5 years, 2 years old. So he was on Halima's back most of the day. And we're out walking. I was just, I asked if I could follow along. They said, no trouble. So I'm following along. And, the Mossad was mostly out for honey that day. And that's why his wife was along. If the men hunt by themselves because they feel like they can do a better job stalking prey, by themselves. And he took a few shots at animals that day. You always bring your bow with you, but he was mostly out for honey that day. And so we're walking along. And as we're walking, Mossad is whistling and whistling and whistling. And I thought he was just like whistling for fun, or just, had a tune in his head or something. And it turns out, as we're walking, we hear this whistle back. And, I hardly even noticed it, but Mossad just stopped dead in his tracks, and his head snaps around, and we just start walking fast toward whatever that little tweet was. I was like, what the heck's going on? And we get to where this bird's up in the branches tweeting away. And Mossad's looking up there, checking it out. And I realized, oh my God, this is this honey guide that I've heard of. So there's a species of bird in that part of Africa. They live all over Africa, but in that part of Africa too, called the honey guide bird. And it is, as its name suggests, it will find people. And if the bird knows where there's a beehive that looks promising, and how the bird knows this or thinks this, we don't know, but the bird knows that there's a beehive nearby that looks promising. And it sees a person walk by, it'll go down and tweet at them and kind of harass the person until the person follows along. And the people, the traditional, cultures that live in that area, they know all about this. This is, people information handed down generation to generation. So they know all about this by the time they're out there themselves looking for stuff and looking for honey. And so they know if you hear a honey guide bird, you follow it. And it takes you to this tree, and Mossad's looking up in the tree, trying to figure out if the bird was right? Because sometimes the birds get it wrong. But Mossad's looking up, trying to figure out if the bird's right. And sure enough, yeah, it is. And so he climbs up this big baobab tree and chops into the limb and comes down with a couple quarts at least of honey. It was just absolutely amazing to watch. And what's cool is this bird, we can use DNA to ask the question, how long ago did it split from its closest relatives? And it split from its closest relatives about 3 million years ago. And so that suggests that there's this niche that humans have created, eating honey and eating enough honey that the birds sort of co-evolved to be, they're kind of a parasite on the situation, if you want to think about it that way, right? They're dependent on the people. That's a a co-evolved symbiotic relationship that's a couple million years old. Isn't that ridiculous?
That is.
And so
amazing.
it's just so cool to kind of just be out there in this landscape and watch that happen.
Wow, that is that is so cool. I loved that story. I think we have such an amazing symbiotic relation with a lot of different species that we've, by and large, again, in this Western culture, kind of ignored or kind of lost. Yeah, it's so interesting. So I have to ask this question. As much as I like to avoid getting into the diet wars and low carb, low fat, and everything, and I'm in the low carb world. That's just where I am. I tell people it's like, saying I'm a Chevy guy versus a Ford guy. I don't care what people eat. It's not a big deal. I just find that's my preference, and that's what I like to coach people on. And if you like Ford, like, you should go find a Ford person. That's just how I am. It's totally fine. Right. So a lot of the conversation around the Hadza and the Maasai, for example, another tribe in that same similar region, a lot of people in this world talk about how one group is more plant-based and the other group is more animal-based. And I had a question initially in your book, like, why did you study the Hadza versus the others? And then you gave a really good explanation that the Maasai is more of a pastoral kind of group, and that is not as, I guess, like, long-winded in our lineage as humans. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So the Maasai they live on their herds, right? So they herd goats and cows. And not surprisingly, that's how they make a living. They eat a lot of animal products. And so people who like the meat or animal-based diets, they often hold them up as like, oh, this is an example of a traditional culture that does this. Absolutely true. But it is not true that that's a kind of model for how our whole species evolved, because actually pastoralists like the Maasai, that way of life is not even quite as old as farming, right? So, and that's not necessarily, it doesn't mean that you should or shouldn't follow it or whatever, but it does mean that it isn't the kind of millions of years old tradition that we have with hunting and gathering. It's as recent as farming is. Same with, people who live in the Arctic. That's another group, another kind of culture that's often held up as, somehow indicative of our past, is these Arctic cultures that eat a lot of meat. It's absolutely true that if you live above the Arctic Circle where plants don't grow, you don't eat a lot of plants. Sure. Of course.
No apple trees up there.
Yeah. And you can be healthy on that. And, traditional cultures can demonstrate that, but they prove that. But people have only been living, the sort of classic Inuit or Eskimo culture that is often held up as an example of traditional cultures doing these high meat-based diets. Those are even less old than pastoralism. They're about 8,000 years old. Pastoralism might be 9,000 or 10,000 years old. Farming is like about 12,000 years old. And farming is by farming, I'm talking domesticating grains and other plant crops,
corn, wheat, different parts of the world, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's so the idea that somehow living in the Arctic or being a pastoralist like the Maasai, that's how that's what humans are evolved to do, and farming is new. It actually gets the timing completely wrong.
Gotcha. So you mentioned in your book, like, basically the biggest priority is to look out for the energy that's in your diet. So whether you go low fat or whether you go, low carb, the biggest thing to worry about is how many calories of energy, like how much of that you're including in your diet. Is that the biggest thing to focus on?
Yeah, that's right. And so, that gets caricatured as like all foods are the same. Because, if you say, well, if calories in, calories out, all foods are the same, doesn't matter what you eat. Is that what you're saying? And no, of course not. Right. Different foods are going to have different effects on people. But it really does come down to when you're looking at the number on the bathroom scale, it really does come down to the calories in and calories out. And so you need to find a diet. If you're in a unhealthy weight and you need to lose weight, you need to find a diet that allows you to eat fewer calories without feeling miserable. And for you, for somebody who likes the low carb thing, that's one great way to do it. Because if you go low carb, well, then you're going to replace that carb with what? You're going to replace it with protein. You're going to replace it with some fats, and those are very filling. And it's hard to kind of overeat on a pure kind of low carb diet if you really adhere to it and do it safely and well. On the other hand, people might say, well, I'm going to go a different way. I'm going to go high fiber. I'm going to get my proteins from beans and other plant-based proteins. and I'm going to go that direction. I'm going to go low fat. I'm going to go plant-based, and that might work for them, and they can feel full on fewer calories that way. So, but it really does come down to eating fewer calories.
I love that. That's great. You've got some other concepts in your book that I really love learning about, and one of them is sharing and being egalitarian. I think that's such a beautiful concept that we miss here in our Western civilization. Tell us how the Hadza tribe talks about sharing.
Yeah. So I'll set this up a little bit by saying, I grew up loving the old Westerns. My dad was a huge Western fan, John Wayne, Clint Eastwood fan, all this stuff, Fistful of Dollars, all that kind of stuff. And so, I grew up in the 80s watching these old Westerns on reruns and whatever on, movie night on TV. And the caricature of these Native American cultures, which a lot of them were hunter-gatherers, was that there's a chief who's in charge and he tells everybody what to do. And, there's like these really strict rules about you got to do this and that. And there's this enforcement of these rules and hierarchy. And so it's funny to go to an actual hunting and gathering culture, not a movie-based one, and to live with a Hadza. And what you learn is nothing could be further from the truth. So the first thing you notice when you go into a Hadza camp is there's no chief, right? There's nobody who's in charge. Nobody can tell anybody else what to do.
Wow.
You can try, right? But nobody's in charge. Men and women are on the same footing, right? Men can't just inherently tell women what to do. It doesn't work like that. Totally egalitarian. And in addition to that, there's this incredibly strong culture of sharing. And so one of the first words I learned of Hadza. So when we work with the Hadza, we speak in Swahili. That's our common language with them, just like it's a common language throughout East Africa. So they grow up learning two languages, their tribal language, Hadza, as well as Swahili, which is what they would use to communicate with nearby tribes who they might run into on any given day. And so we learn Swahili if we go and work with them. And so my Swahili's, well, these days I haven't been able to go because of the pandemic, but my Swahili is good enough to get by out there. And so, we speak with them in Swahili, but you do end up picking up a few words of Hadza. And one of the first words of Hadza I learned was za. And I heard them saying it to each other and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I asked Brian Wood, who actually can speak Hadza. I said, Brian, what does za mean? I'm not getting it. And he goes, oh, it just means give. And you realize, oh, yeah. They're saying za to each other all the time because it's like, hey, give me some of that honey. Hey, give me some of those berries. Hey, give me some of that, tuber. And there's no please, there's no thank you. It's just like, hey, give me that. And the cultural, that kind of shook me for a while. Like, why isn't there the please and thank you? Right. Because, when I was a kid growing up, again, like in the 80s, and I hope kids these days too, you learn how to say please and thank you. And those, you have to say that, and that's drilled into you. And they don't ever say please and thank you. And it's because you realize, it's because their culture of sharing is so strong that there's really, to say please and thank you is to imply that the person might not share with you, right? The reason I would say please and thank you to you, Casey, if I were to ask you to share your beef jerky, because I know you're low carb, is that you would, if I say please and thank you, it's because, well, I'm hoping that you will, and I want to thank you that you did, with the implication that you might have decided not to share, right? That you would have been within your rights to not share with me. But in Hadza culture, that would be unthinkable.
Wow. That
you wouldn't share your beef jerky, right?
Wow.
And so, of course, like, why do you say please and thank you? It's almost insulting to say please and thank you, because of course we're going to share. I mean, that's how it goes.
Fascinating.
And so it's really funny to think about sharing being so deeply ingrained that you don't even say please and thank you anymore. And I should just say, they do have the concepts, of course. They will say please and thank you for like big things or sort of out of the ordinary things. They have the concept of being thankful. I don't want to give people the wrong impression. So they have that idea. It's not like they don't understand it, but for the day to day, they just don't need it.
Wow. That's so cool. Make sure you send me your address after this. I'll send you some of my beef jerky. I make some really good beef jerky.
Oh, cool. That'd be fun. Yeah, man. I love beef jerky.
Send you some for sure.
I love it.
What?
Yeah, we'll just to finish that thought on that.
Sure.
I want to say, people talk about, it's all hunting or, it's all gathering. And that misses the point completely. The magic of hunting and gathering is not the hunting or the gathering. It's the and. right? Hunting and gathering. And the fact that we are the only species alive where half of us have one job and half of us have a completely different job, and we share the benefits of those jobs at the end of the day. The sharing is key. And that is an unbeatable strategy, right? That is why we are at 8 billion people strong on the planet and in every landscape across the globe, because hunting and gathering. It's incredibly, I think there's a story there. There's a lesson there about, our physiology is built to be hunting and gathering. But hopefully our behavior and the way that we interact with each other should be informed by that too, that we should be sharing and cooperative, because that's actually how we're evolved.
I love that. That is so beautifully said. I completely agree. You close your book by talking about being kind to ourselves, being kind to one another, and being kind to the planet. And I think that message is so important. Why did you decide to write a book that, a bum like me could understand and really grasp and learn a lot from? Like it's really well done. It's really well understood. And, you could have written a textbook, but you decided to write something that people like me could understand. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, that means a lot to me to hear you say that. I love doing science, and I feel very lucky that I get to do science for a career. But it's only fun for me if you get to share it. Right. I mean, the whole point of doing this and being one of the few folks in the world, think about what percentage of folks in the world get to be scientists. I don't know. It's a vanishing fraction of the population who are lucky enough to do this job. And, our job in our own various fields is to be out there at the edge of what we understand and chipping away and mapping new places, and trying to push things further. And if we don't come back every now and then and tell everybody what we found, then we're not really doing our job. Right. And if we're just talking to each other there at the boundaries, at the forefront of things, and talking to other scientists, you got to do that too. But if we're not coming back and saying, guys, let me explain to you, what I found and how this might affect you and how it might affect the way we live our lives. And, that is a part of what I do, part of my job that I think is really important. And it wasn't, for me, it didn't feel like an extra thing to do. It felt like, okay, this is what I get to do now. And to have the opportunity to do that and share that. And that's why I wanted to make the book fun. And I hope it was fun to read. That was the idea, was to get people excited about it and share some of the joy and the excitement I get from doing this work, because it's just so fun for me.
I love that sharing was a key word in all of that. I'm on my second turn reading it, and I just really love it. You did write it in a fun way. It's really funny. It's engaging. I've definitely learned a lot from it, so I really appreciate you doing that. What is one thing that you've learned personally from the Hadza that you've taken into your personal life that you make kind of like a daily practice?
I think if I have to boil it down to one thing, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to do a couple things. One is this kind of Hamnashid attitude, to relax, whenever I get really worked up about a grant that we didn't get, or a paper that didn't get reviewed well, or some troll on Twitter or whatever, I just remember that there's this group of wonderful folks in Tanzania who don't know or care about any of it and are just out there living their lives. And I can do the same thing and just live my life. And I don't have to get so wound up in our society today is designed to wind you up, right? That's what gets you to click on the next headline. That's what gets you to click on the next, scroll through your social media feed. And we don't have to do that to ourselves. It's kind of fun. It's fun to wrestle with that. But to let yourself off the hook and kind of unwind from it too is, I think, important. So I take that away. And then, trying to move every day. I don't always accomplish that. I like to exercise. I like to get out and move. But I take it more seriously now, and I try to integrate it into my life throughout my day, rather than just have a block of exercise. I try to move all day. Like, that's a lesson I've learned from the Hadza. So chill out, get outside and move.
That's great. You mentioned tweets earlier coming from a bird versus coming from the internet. And I think all of us could use more tweets coming from birds versus internet. That's amazing. What is one simple tip you would like to leave with the listener? I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit. But what is one simple tip that somebody that's listening to this could take and implement in their lives for some benefit?
Get outside.
Perfect.
You know why? Because if you get out here, here's why. That sounds kind of a little bit off topic, but let me tell you why. If you get outside, you're probably moving. And if you get outside, you're probably pretty far from your fridge. And if you get outside, you're going to get sunshine. You're going to be taking a break from work. And all of those things are super important. Movement, eating healthier, not eating because you're bored, eating because, eating when you need to. And just being outside is, so if you could just do one thing every day, would be get outside. And the other thing I'd say is, we need to think about diet and exercise as two different tools for two different jobs. Diet is the lever you want to pull for weight change, and exercise is the lever you want to pull for everything else, for heart health, immune function health, cognitive health, strength. And so, they're not sort of, you can't trade one for the other. You have to kind of do both.
I love it. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours and hours, but we want to be respectful of your time. Where should people go to find you and your work?
Yeah, so I hope they'll check out the book. The book is called Burn, and you can get that wherever books are sold. So you can get it at your local book seller, or you can get it on Amazon. And if you want to find out what we're doing in the lab these days, you can find us at Duke. Look for me, Herman Pontzer at Duke, and you'll find our website. Or if you want to find out more about the Hadza, and particularly if you want to find out how you can kind of help them out and keep them a strong, vibrant community, you can check out the Hadza Fund, HADZAFUND.org. And that's this is a nonprofit that we've set up. Brian Wood and Dave Reichlin and I and a couple others have set up this the Hadza Fund to raise money to help them with things like access to health care, mosquito nets, other kind of ways that we can give back and try to keep them a strong and healthy community forever. So please check them out if you're interested in the Hadza or the work, hadzafund.org.
I love that. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Herman Pontzer, PhD, thank you so much for everything you've done. We're so grateful for your work. We're grateful you almost got burned to death in Tanzania. We're so grateful that you would be willing to share your knowledge. Like you said, go out and learn something, but come back and explain it to people in a way that can be really well understood. We're really grateful for that. We're grateful for your time today. So thank you so much for everything you've done, and thank you for appearing here today.
Thanks, man. It was really fun talking with you. Hope to do it again.
It was a great chat. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.